Welcome to the Epic Podcast miniseries in anticipation of the upcoming 2022 Epic Conference in Amsterdam from October 9th through the 12th. I'm your host, Matt Artz, and in this miniseries, we will explore the conference theme of resilience and other salient questions about the practice of ethnography and what it means to build a community. I'll be joined by guests from around the world who are either part of the conference committee or presenters. Hope you enjoy. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Epic mini podcast series in anticipation of the upcoming 2022 conference. I'm here today with Tracy Thomas, David Gorin, and Michael Powell. All three will be presenting at the conference in three different types of sessions. So to begin, I'd like to have everybody just introduce themselves. Tracy, would you mind by starting and telling us a little bit about yourself and how you came into the Epic community?
Sure. So my name is Tracy Thomas. I'm a principal strategic designer at BCG. I'm based out of the Boston office. My first Epic conference was some time ago. This was, early in my career as a design strategist and researcher. And I've always just been connected to the community, at least the online community. But just recently, with this upcoming conference with the topic on resilience, I decided to not only attend, but to participate as a presenter. And so I submitted I submitted a Pachakucha presentation.
So David, again, we'd like you to introduce yourself. Now, I know you come, more from sort of a writing, post-production, audio field, not, traditional ethnographer, though your project that you're going to talk about is very much ethnographic. So you're kind of an interesting addition to the group, and we really look forward to hearing it. But without spoiling it, would you mind telling us all a little about, who you are and how you found Epic?
Sure. I'm David Gorin. I'm a radio producer, audio documentary. I say audio documentary or a podcast producer for people under 40 who have not encountered radio per se. I am on a public radio listserv in New York City, and Allegra Oxborough, who is part of the Epic community, did an outreach to ask if people to participate in the wildcard track. And so I thought about it, and I thought that my project would qualify and make an interesting presentation for Epic.
Michael, again, would you mind introducing yourself, telling us, a little bit about your work as a consultant and how you came to the Epic community?
Yeah, thanks. My name is Michael Powell. I'm a cultural anthropologist. I work on a range of different kinds of projects, independently and in partnership with some other consulting groups. Most recently with the Practica group. I've done a lot of other kinds of different projects. I spent a lot of years working with design firms, doing things on everyday kind of destinations like grocery stores and retail destinations. I have a PhD in cultural anthropology from Rice University. So I've been doing professional ethnographic research and strategy consulting for about 16 years now, and have been involved in anthropology and ethnography for even longer. And so I've been aware of and part of the Epic community for quite some time now. I spent a lot of time working on papers, the editing papers and things like that, kind of in the background. And then I had a chance to write an essay and present a few years back. And I just keep trying to be involved with this, with Epic, and being part of the conversation. So I've got a few things going on for the Epic conference this year too.
So, I think it's interesting. One of the interesting things about Epic is the diversity of the community. And so if you think of it even today, right, anthropologist, designer, audio production, audio documentarian. So that's the kind of beauty that this community really brings together. And it's one of the exciting things, of course, that is different than many other conferences. Now, since all of you will be attending and presenting this year, I'm just curious to get your input on the theme if you choose to weigh in. I know, Tracy, you already mentioned the theme. So it sounded like that was what particularly called you. Was that the case?
Yes, that was the case. Just to kind of piggyback off of what Michael was saying, as a strategic designer, I've worked across many different industries doing a range of work around strategy and customer experience. But when I saw the theme on resilience, I moved a little bit away from professional work, casework that I was working on, and I took a different lens. So what I'm presenting is something very personal to me, my own personal experience dealing with resilience, particularly around the pandemic. And there were a number of things that I wanted to do a little bit differently. Number one, kind of like turn the research lens inward, right? I'm typically working with clients, gleaning insights about their customers, pain points, and everything like that. But yeah, I said, well, what if I turn the research lens inward? And the other thing was that I pushed myself to, I guess, be a little bit more vulnerable, right? To open up more about myself and my experiences. I do tie it back to my experience as a designer. And I think the third thing was that I challenged myself with the pachakucha. Admittedly, I saw the theme, and I looked at all the deadlines, and I was going to, submit another presentation that was related to project work, and then I said, "Oh, I think pachakucha is going to be a lot easier," but it's actually not. It is really hard to get just really pithy and succinct and very clear and concise with your messaging. So that's a very high level overview. It's that I am, sharing a more personal experience about what resilience means, and tying it back to my role as a designer and strategist.
Great. And certainly, you could maybe make the argument that few things are more embodied than the sort of auto-ethnographic experience. And so I want to come back to the point of embodiment in just a bit. But David, I'd also like to ask you, because certainly pirate radio would seem like an act of resilience, at least on the part of those who are hosting it. So did that factor into your decision at all?
That was the key factor. When I heard about the theme, I thought that my project would be a good fit. One, basically, this is sort of a shadow or a grassroots community radio scene that exists because these communities, West Indian, Latino, and in some cases Orthodox Jewish, they don't have, especially for the former two, they don't economically, politically, they don't have access to the system to set up community radio. So it's sort of in the cracks of the dial over the past 25 to 30 years, these stations have taken hold. But there's also an additional condition of resilience that, when the pandemic hit in 2020, these stations, which, as I said, have been on the air since the mid-90s, in this format, they addressed the pandemic in a very personal way, targeted to their communities. Stations that would only come on the air in the evenings were suddenly coming on during the day. They would have programming that was very specific to how the pandemic was affecting their communities. They would have quarantine streams, quarantine mixes. There would be COVID calypsos that were performed on the air. There would be shout outs to essential workers in the community. And that has been something that the COVID piece and the pirates that's been something that I've been particularly interested in and have been trying to bring to the fore.
Yeah, it's really inspiring, story to hear of the work that they were engaged in, and also the way that you're capturing it. Michael, how about you? Anything about the theme?
Yeah, I like this theme. I'm connecting it through a tutorial I'm doing on ethnographic interviewing and a social event about listening. And I feel like there's a certain value in the kind of ethnographic research that we do in terms of listening and listening to others. And I've been very attuned to a concept of reciprocity, that in listening, we're not just sort of neutral observers, but listening, especially the kind of active, participatory ethnographic listening that we do participate in, provides a kind of value, both to participants, to our community, to audiences. Listening in general is kind of a undervalued or often misunderstood practice. And I feel very strongly that listening does things, that it's not just being there, but that we can do things through listening. And that, it's not just, I work on, Tracy and I were both talking about how we work on design projects where you translate research into things and you make things. And that is obviously a value too. But the listening itself, I think, is often overlooked. And so I feel like there's a power in that. And there's many stories I think, I and many other ethnographers can share about the value we offer to the people we listen to. And I feel like there's a sense of resilience that we can kind of share with others, with people who are listened to. Oftentimes, like what David was just talking about, people who are not listened to enough. People whose voices are not often heard, and need ways to be heard, and to have their voice kind of be amplified.
As in your case, as an anthropologist, there's obviously a great deal of value put into observation, as you kind of alluded to in the beginning, but there's of course also value in listening, as you say. But I'm curious to know, just to build on what you were just saying, in the course of the pandemic, our listening went to essentially remote, right? It was sort of the embodied, like truly in-person experience where we're in the room with the other listening, able to sort of sense all of the context. Do you draw any distinction there, or is in that one adds value over the other, or do you feel that listening, maybe attentively or properly, as however you may sort of instruct it, can transcend that kind of barrier?
That is a great question. There are certainly limitations, like right now with us not being in person together, and there are things that we can pay attention to that in person that you just can't on video calls, of course. But then there's also always going to be that element of just engaging with people very deeply. And that is something that I feel like, during the pandemic times, during our Zoom times, we can focus in on what people have to say. And in some ways, you could argue that, with like a format like what we're doing right now, that you have to be kind of laser focused on that individual voice, and that person that you're paying attention to.
Yeah, I just had a reaction to that. I think listening, you are also like tapping into other senses, right? So, you talked about the Zoom calls, and I think there's this need to engender trust, right? So it's, being able to hear their voice, being able to make eye contact, right? Being able to kind of feel comfortable in that environment. And I think that's a really great opportunity to think about or to probe on more when you're thinking about listening, what other senses are you going to pull on to engender that trust, to enable others to feel comfortable and to open up. So, I'm just reflecting back on the height of the pandemic and having to kind of jump into this virtual environment and what that was like. But not being able to see someone is jarring to me now. Before I could turn off my video camera, but just being able to, see someone and see their body language and make that eye contact has been really important.
So, for both of you who do this, do this kind of work in the context of designing, as you both described, be it for a corporation or as a consultant, things have changed because of the pandemic, and it's plausible that managers or clients may not want to pay for sort of the in-person ethnographic experience. So what would you say, to potentially anybody who's listening, in maybe a managerial kind of leadership role who themselves are not a researcher? Why do we think that the embodied sort of practice of ethnography is critical to get back to after this period of the pandemic?
That's a great question. I'll try a response. I'm sure Tracy has got even more insights. But that as much as we are distant, there are still many, many things that we do with our bodies, in person, in places. Whether it's a product that we're using or consuming, or an experience that we're participating in. We can talk, we can communicate, and have meetings from a distance. And that's fine, but, I still need to make breakfast for my kids this morning. I still need to drive them to school. They are now back to school. All of these things continue happening in person. I think this is the moment, and I think there's a great value in the opportunity to do some research from a distance, because it does allow us to find a more diverse audience, potentially, of people in different places and coming from different places. And there's that flexibility. So I do feel like we can do more, but I don't think it should be in place of also going to places, seeing and interacting with people. So I think there's a benefit in this experience. But I don't know, Tracy, what's been your experience?
Yeah, when I think about ethnography, I think one of the biggest goals is to capture the lived experience. And it's hard to capture that lived experience with just a digital interface. You need to be, in that environment. It's not just what the person is saying, but where they are, the things around them, the people around them. And, this is how we are going to uncover the attitudes and mindsets, the pain points. I think technology can enable you to do that, to bridge that line of sight into the person's environment and the lived experience. But I do believe that, actually being there, with the person is going to be a lot richer than it just being in a digital interface. And I'm kind of thinking of the metaverse. The metaverse is taking our 2D virtual experience into the 3D space. I think there's things, that's going to happen in the future. It's coming down the pike in terms of digital technologies that will enable that. But I think we all agree that, kind of being in person, kind of being there, being in that environment, and being with the person is going to be a much richer engagement than it just being in this type of format.
And now, building on that, Tracy, you also spoke of earlier with your session about wanting to sort of bring, to turn the lens inward, to share some of the vulnerabilities. And it reminds me that, as researchers, we of course do need to continually do that to uncover our biases and to recognize, our own limitations in the process. But I'm curious to know, has this reminded you, of anything that you need to be doing, actually say in your professional practice, like has this act of putting together this session where you're reflecting on yourself taught you anything new?
I think it just reinforced why design is so important. So for example, one of the things I talk about in my experience is really embracing ambiguity. No one would have thought that the pandemic was going to hit, right? And it just turned everything upside down for us, right? And we had to pivot and do things differently, right? And so it's how do you embrace the fears? How do you embrace the unknown? That was one thing. The other thing was, so when the pandemic hit, I was just by myself. I was living alone, quarantining alone, but it was this idea of connection, social connection that was really important. And so when you think about design, just having that social connection, bringing diverse voices together, and that is what's gonna help you to see new opportunities or new solutions. And in my case, just help me to move forward during the pandemic. What are other things that I think also it helped me to slow down, right? To slow down and to look at things from different perspectives, right? And I think that is a very key tenet of design, that you really have to open the aperture, right? And not be so laser focused, I guess, or, have tunnel vision. And so as I was quarantining by myself, trying to figure out this new world in front of me, I had to do a lot more experimentation. There was a lot more discovery going on. So yeah, I would say if anything, it really reminded me of the design process in general.
So we are getting, back to a conference, very much in person. I know, Michael, you said that you've been behind the scenes for many years, helping to edit papers. Tell me, how does it feel to be back, or to soon, knowing that you'll soon be back in person, and what that experience will be like for a conference?
Yeah, I'm excited to see people in person again. I feel like slowly I've been moving back into those kinds of experiences. And it's exciting, and I've never been to Amsterdam, so I'm excited to go places and see people. I do hope people have kind of learned lessons. I like, Tracy's points about the possibilities opened up by this pandemic, and maybe the way that we see things and hear things, the way we kind of experience things. I think anytime you move away from, you go into quarantine, whether it's self-imposed or because of global pandemic that when you do come back to the world of experiences that I think it's a moment to sort of refresh your senses, or I hope so. And I know that I've had similar kinds of experiences. Last night, I went to a concert, and I don't know that I've been to a concert like that in quite a long time, and it's just a different feel. It's just a completely different feel versus what basically we were taking it for granted in the past.
So, have you gotten back in person with consulting?
Finally, yes. I took a trip last month to Phoenix. So talk about tactile experiences. I live in Houston, and the only place warmer than Houston right now is Phoenix. So being in 115 degree heat, that it's interesting actually, because as I'm doing a tutorial on interviewing, and there was something about the pandemic experience of research that did kind of help me focus in on what I find valuable and also challenging about ethnographic interviewing, in that, when you're there in person, you get to take note of different dimensions of the experience that you might not typically ask about with participants. So case in point, in Phoenix, it would be easy to overlook on a Zoom interview the dimension of the heat and how that impacts your life and your lived experience. Another thing I had always or I'd continued to take note of is this sense that again, are we asking people questions and doing research that authentically engages through listening to people, or are we just trying to extract information? And there's just so much research happening these days where I feel like we kind of fall into that trap. I've got a list of questions. We need to run through this. And I kind of call that the extraction model, just trying to extract information from you, as opposed to, being there, sitting with it, as Tracy mentioned, slowing down, opening the aperture. And I feel like that is really core to what ethnography, ethnographic listening is really all about.
Yeah, no, it's I think a great point. The kind of dichotomy of extraction versus maybe a true genuine dialogue. And David, if I could throw that over to you, does that resonate at all? Obviously you're trying to tell the stories through audio, and so conversation seems critical to that, versus just trying to pull out some facts that you need to tell your story. So how do you go about really kind of crafting that genuine dialogue?
Well, I think a personal connection is key. Sort of, I don't know who said it, but the phrase "listening is an act of love" resonates with me. So I think my early influences in college, I did have some oral history courses, and I've done some oral history since. So when I sit down to an interview, I'm in my field where we're making music documentaries. I've worked as an engineer, I've worked with producers who are primarily, right, they have 5 questions and they get what they need and they run out the door. I really take the opposite approach. It could go on for several hours. And I go out within the community. I talk to people on the street on doing something about pirate radio. First, I approached it sort of as drawing from radio monitoring practices, radio hobbyist practices, to sort of make lists and listen to what's on the air. But in terms of finding people in the community, the people who run the stations often don't want to engage because they're in an illegal activity. But I found by just going through the neighborhood, talking to people, they say, oh, down the street, I think there's a station behind, that door. Or, I think my brother does something with that. And my greatest connection came through, I was just sort of in frustration out on the streets again. And I was just recording sound in the middle of the neighborhood. And a man called me over and said, oh, are you recording because of the unrest in Haiti today? There was a rise in the gas tax, and there were some riots, and the Marines were called in. So I said, no, I haven't heard anything about that. And I told him what I'm doing, and he agreed. And I said, no, I don't know anything about that, but I am doing this project about your community radio. And he agreed to talk to me. And in the middle of the conversation, he revealed that he was a member of one of the pirate radio stations. So sometimes just getting out there and connecting with people is the best way to go.
Well, I appreciate taking the time. Good luck at the conference. Thanks for listening, and be sure to check out the EPIC website at epicpeople.org and follow, subscribe, and share to help us build some anticipation for this year's conference being held in Amsterdam from October 9th through the 12th. I'm your host, Matt Artz. Until next time.